The 1st of May, 1942, an Allied convoy steamed through the cold Arctic waters, traveling from Iceland to bring vital war material to the embattled and beleaguered Soviet Union. But in the uncertainty of war, death doesn't always come from enemy bombs or torpedoes. As the Royal Navy destroyer HMS Punjabi would soon learn, as she drove on through the fog, even just a simple trick of the eye can lead to death. HMS Punjabi was a tribal-class destroyer of the Royal Navy. The tribal classes were initially supposed to be designed as light escort cruisers, but after several design changes and in response to other foreign powers creating heavier destroyers, the tribals were designed to be a heavy but fast destroyer. Fitted with an emphasis on gunpowder over torpedoes, the hard-hitting destroyers were very popular with their crews. Overall, 27 of these vessels were completed and served in the Royal Navy, the Royal Canadian Navy, and the Royal Australian Navy. The ships served throughout World War II and the Korean War, some serving as late as the early 60s. A tribal class is still on display as a museum ship in Hamilton, Ontario, in Canada, the HMCS Haida. But to say the tribal classes had a fruitful career is up to debate. Of the 16 built in service for the Royal Navy, only 4 survived the war. Then again, the Canadians lost only 1, and the Australians lost none. But losses aside, the tribal class ships saw extensive usage in almost all facets of the war. HMS Punjabi was ordered on the 19th of June 1936 and laid down in the Scots Shipbuilding and Engineering Yard in Greenock, Scotland. She entered the water on the 18th of December the following year, but wouldn't be completed and commissioned until the 29th of March 1939. Upon completion, the destroyer was a respectable 1,891 tons displacement. She was 377 feet, or 114.9 meters long, and 36 feet 6 inches, or 11.13 meters at the beam. She was powered by 3 Admiralty fuel-oil-fired 3-drum boilers, producing 44,000 ship horsepower. That horsepower was put into its 2 Parsons-geared turbines, driving its twin shafts. This pushed the destroyer along at an impressive 36 knots. For armament, the ship was equipped with 4 quick-firing Mark 12 dual 4.7-inch or 120mm turrets, equaling 8 guns in total. She also featured an impressive AA suite of 1 quad 2-pound 40mm pom-pom AA guns, 2 quad Vickers 50 cal AA machine guns, as well as the main armament being able to elevate to 40 degrees to be used in an anti-aircraft role. Perhaps not to defend itself, but seeing as it was designed as a convoy escort, it could definitely be used to defend others in its charge. Finally, it carried 1 quad launcher for 21-inch or 533mm torpedoes. A bit less than its contemporaries, but it was designed with an emphasis of guns over torpedoes. Later on during the war, she was fitted to hold anti-submarine depth charges. HMS Punjabi set sail under the command of Commander John Trevor Lean. The 36-year-old commanding officer had been in service with the Royal Navy since 1923. He previously served as the commanding officer of the A-class destroyer HMS Antelope. After completing sea trials, Punjabi's first mission was on the 1st of June, 1939. She participated in a joint search for the new submarine HMS Thetis. The Thetis was going through sea trials at this time and went missing during her dive trials. During a test dive, an error on the part of the crew caused a torpedo tube hatch to be open whilst the outer hatch was open to the sea. The Thetis was found, but only 4 of the 103 men on board were able to escape the sunken submarine. In September, with the outbreak of World War II and the threat of roving Kriegsmarine submarines harassing trade routes, HMS Punjabi and the 6th Destroyer Flotilla were assigned to anti-submarine patrols and convoy defense in the northwestern approaches to the icy North Sea. For months, she would bounce between here and Scapa Flow, escorting convoys and screening for German U-boats. Her only rest coming on the 2nd of December when she had a particularly bad collision with the merchant vessel Laird's Crest, severely damaging her bow and needing to be laid up for months for repairs. A terrifying bit of foreshadowing for her eventual fate. By February of 1940, she was back in full functioning duty, escorting convoys and even the battleship group that was dispatched to track down and destroy the German raiding cruiser, Admiral Hipper. Hipper had gotten into a surface engagement with a particularly tenacious destroyer named HMS Glowworm. who, in spite of being highly outgunned by the Kriegsmarine cruiser, didn't want to go down without a fight, even resorting to ramming the much larger ship before sinking. In April, she was sent with a small complement of destroyers to escort the mighty battleship HMS Warspite. The ship steamed towards Narvik, Norway, to assist in an ongoing fight against the Germans there. In the small naval engagement called the Second Battle of Narvik, the Royal Navy encountered 8 Kriegsmarine destroyers, subsequently smashing 3 of them before the remainder beat a hasty retreat and ended up scuttling later on. During this engagement, Punjabi received at least 6 hits from German 5-inch guns. One hit even disabled her engines for a time. The ship recovered and after the engagement made her way to Davenport Dockyard for repairs and refit. During this time, in anticipation of harassment from the German Luftwaffe, her AA armament was bolstered. Her X turret was removed and replaced by a twin 4-inch or 100mm AA turret, the turret having a higher firing angle than the 120mm it replaced. Being laid up for refit, she returned to sea in June in time to assist in the evacuations of Saint-Nazaire, as the battle for France was starting to go south. But after this, she was pulled back north. The situation was growing dire for the United Kingdom. The French and Dutch capitulation, coupled with the Italians joining the war, left the island in a tough spot. In February of 1941, she and a few of her sister ships returned to Scapa Flow for yet another refit, this time fitting new ASV radars, originally used in Royal Air Force aircraft, now modified for usage on a ship. During this time, Commander Lean departed the ship, a distinguished service order pinned to him for his actions at the Second Battle of Narvik. Relieving him was Commander Stuart Austin Buss. The 41-year-old captain was a 2-decade veteran of the Royal Navy. The seasoned sailing man had previously commanded the HMS Verity, Tiverton, Foxhound, and Electra. In May, she left port to aid in the search for the infamous battleship Bismarck, after sinking the pride of the Royal Navy fleet, the battlecruiser HMS Hood. After this, she returned to the cold waters of the North Sea, between Norway and Scapa Flow. On the 30th of August, she escorted the aircraft carrier Argus, as she brought Lend-Lease Hawker Hurricane aircraft and RAF personnel to the Soviet Union. She would continue performing these convoy escorts until she was forced to return to port for another refit and repair, this time just working on her worn-down machinery, which was beaten up by operating so hard in the cold, stormy conditions of the Arctic. In January, Commander Buss departed the vessel, and his command was replaced by 36-year-old Lieutenant Commander John Montague Granville Waldgrave. The man had over 2 decades of naval service, and a Distinguished Service Cross for anti-submarine actions whilst in command of the HMS Puffin. In the beginning of 1942, it was thought that the terrifying German battleship, the Tirpitz, had put to sea and was on the prowl for Allied shipping, eager to ebb the flow of supplies to the Soviet war machine. Punjabi and several other ships were tasked with searching for the Nazi battleship. But on the 11th of March, she was detached after her steering gear was damaged. It didn't matter anyways. Shortly before this, Tirpitz had given up her patrol, heading back to port. Punjabi headed for Iceland for repairs, as well as to prepare for the next mission. She would be assisting with the escort of Convoy PQ15. This convoy would be traveling from Reykjavik, Iceland to Murmansk in the Soviet Union. Consisting of 25 merchant ships carrying supplies to the Soviets, the convoy would have an escort of minesweepers and destroyers. Furthermore, she would have 2 support groups, a cruiser cover force and a distant cover force. Punjabi was part of the distant cover force. Also in this force was the massive battleship HMS King George V, the American North Carolina class battleship USS Washington, as well as the illustrious class aircraft carrier HMS Victorious. Also in the formation were the 2 American heavy cruisers USS Tuscaloosa and USS Wichita, as well as the light cruiser HMS Kenya and 9 other destroyers. On the 26th of April, the large fleet departed Reykjavik, Iceland, heading out east into the cold waters of the North Sea and Arctic. Despite being spotted just 2 days later by Luftwaffe aircraft, the convoy was unassailed. But on the 1st of May, the situation on the North Sea would take a turn for the worse. The day started with the seas being almost miraculously calm, the often turbulent North Sea laying down like glass as the ships of the distant cover force steamed along at a standard 25 knots. Punjabi sailed astern of another destroyer, the HMS Inglefield. Abaft her port beam, near more to her port quarter, was the mighty King George V. But as the day progressed, the ship sailed into an oppressive fog bank, that socked them in on all sides. Additional lookouts were posted as the ship steamed silently into the fog. The steady drone of the ship's turbines her constant companion. The stern of the Inglefield only occasionally popping into view of the bow. But suddenly, around 14:45, the silence is broken. The forward lookout screams out, spotting a mine. The captain can't see it, but there's no time to look for it. At 25 knots, every second counts. A single hesitation can be difference between life and death by fire and shrapnel. He ordered the helm thrown over hard to port to avoid the encroaching naval mine. The ship's wheeled hard over, passing to port. But out of the fog looms a metal behemoth. The bow of the 42,000-ton King George V emerges, on a collision course with the tiny destroyer. Whether the battleship saw the destroyer or not is irrelevant. At 42,000 tons and over 700 feet in length, the massive warship wouldn't have been able to alter course or slow down to avoid collision anyways. The enormous ship ran through the Punjabi like a hot knife through butter, smashing into her just abaft her engine room as it split the tiny ship in two. A man aboard Punjabi describes the chaos of the situation. I was in the main wireless cabin in the forward part of the ship, prior to relieving another telegraphist in the cabin aft where we conducted our interception work. Suddenly there was a tremendous crash. The Punjabi heeled over sharply on its side, and all the lights went out. First thought was that we had been torpedoed, but our nemesis turned out to be one of our own ships. The 42,000-ton battleship King George V had rammed and cut in half our 1,850-ton destroyer. I made my way up on the deck, and soon after we got the order to abandon ship. Sliding down the sloping side of the forward part of the ship, I got a liberal coating of fuel oil on entering the freezing water. No swimmer, I looked around coming to the surface and was lucky to grab onto a Carly float nearby, hoisting myself onto the side where I sat in the freezing water until we were picked up by a destroyer, HMS Martin. The heavy stern of the destroyer sank quickly as the HMS King George V sailed on past the two halves. But the American battleship USS Washington was following in behind her, and to avoid being damaged, was forced to pass between the two sinking halves. As she did so, the depth charges on the stern of the sinking destroyer detonated with a resounding blast. Those trapped in the stern section were instantly killed. Others in the cold water nearby were killed or injured as well. The sailors inside the Washington felt the massive explosion reverberate through the hull, causing light damage to the battleship. But fortune smiled on those in the forward section of Punjabi, this portion staying afloat long enough for rescue ships to swoop in and pick up survivors off of her, and out of the frigid waters of the North Sea. 169 in total were pulled from the water or the bow of the stricken destroyer. Ironically, they were transferred to the ship that had done her in, the HMS King George V. The collision had torn a jagged hole, 40 feet or 12 meters long, in her bow, and she needed to limp back to Scapa Flow for repairs. But in total, 49 sailors perished in the explosion. Upon further investigation, minesweepers searched the entirety of the convoy's trackline. Not a single mine was found. In fact, no other ships or lookouts remembered seeing a mine at all. Whatever the lookout on the bow had seen, it likely was a mistake, and a fatal one at that. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of Maritime Horrors. I know it's been a while since I uploaded one. Currently, I'm going through the process of getting my Merchant Mariner's credentials, and if any of you are Merchant Mariners, you know how time-consuming that is. So that's taken up a lot of my time. But thankfully, everything's clearing up now, and I should be able to get back to a more regular upload schedule. Unfortunately, once I get on a ship, it might be a little more interspersed as well. But again, thank you so much for tuning in. If you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe and share it with your friends. It helps me out a lot. This channel's been growing by leaps and bounds, and it's thanks to folks like you. Fair winds and following seas to you, shipmates.